In Sudan, a general and a warlord are fighting for control over the capital and the country. Welcome back to Governance this week as we connect with Khartoum, where Hamid Khalafallah is unfortunately amidst the violence. Hamid is a policy analyst and an expert in democratization processes, and he's also a former young African leader at the UI School of Transnational Governance. Hamid, thanks so much for joining us in this very difficult moment for your country.
Thank you, Roland, for having me.
Really a pleasure to connect, despite this horrific situation in Sudan. Let's start by talking about what is actually happening exactly in Sudan and how is it affecting daily life in the capital of Khartoum.
So a full-on war has started on April 15th, very early in the morning, when the two generals, the commander of the Sudanese Armed Forces and the commander of the support forces paramilitary, who were just the night before, head of a sovereign council and his deputy. And then the next morning they became enemies, launching a full-on war all over the country, but it's mainly focused in Khartoum, the capital, in a few cities over the Darfur region, which has already been prone to conflict over the past 2 decades or so. And then in Merowe, in northern Sudan, and in other cities across the country. The war, so far now we're on day 12, has claimed the lives of at least 460 people, but we think that is a very under-representation of the actual number of casualties, because so many people, were killed without being able to access hospitals or mortgage or anything. So the mortgages or so on, so they have not been accounted for. Then, in addition to that, there is a very difficult humanitarian crisis unfolding in parallel. Obviously, the vast percentage of the Sudanese population has already been living in very difficult economic situations due to the economic crisis that has been taking place over the past few years, but was exacerbated by the coup that these very two generals launched in October 2021. So Sudanese people have already been in a very difficult situation. With this war ongoing, the economic situation is becoming impossible. The humanitarian situation is becoming very difficult. Medical care is almost impossible to access, with over 50% of the hospitals in Khartoum, almost 60% actually out of service, either because they got bombed or because medical personnel and patients cannot reach these hospitals, or because they don't have running water or power, or so on. Food supplies are running short all over the city. I would speak about Khartoum because I live in Khartoum, the capital. So many food supplies are running out. Most neighborhoods do not have electricity, no power. Actually speaking, it's a little dark because it's just sunlight. Power is out. It has been out for most of the past 12 days. And so has running water been. So I think people are rightly focusing on the war side of things, but it's equally important to look at the humanitarian and economic difficulties that people are facing in parallel to the security situation.
Yeah. An extremely difficult situation there in Khartoum, Hamid. Before we start looking a little bit at the regional and the transnational picture, what can we expect to happen in the next few days? There have been a few ceasefires which were actually broken almost straight away. What can we have? What can we expect in the very short term?
Unfortunately, from where I sit now and from what I am seeing and so on, in the short term, I can only see this war continuing. Like you said, all ceasefires were violated by both parties. even ceasefires that were brokered by, global powers like the US and so on were not respected by both parties. So I think we are seeing repeatedly that both generals are not responding to the current, language being used, towards them. So ceasefires are not going to hold the war; is going to continue, and that would lead to a continuation of the, catastrophic humanitarian situation, which is very bad. But it's also, people are not getting any support because there are no safe passages for humanitarian assistance. And also, I think the foreign governments and international institutions have been exclusively focused on evacuating their staff and their citizens in Sudan, and very little attention was given to securing safe passages for humanitarian assistance.
Yeah. In fact, you already mentioned a few foreign powers. In fact, the regional picture is actually quite complex, isn't it? Several of Sudan's neighbors, including Ethiopia, Chad, and South Sudan, have had political upheaval of their own. Sudan is an Arab African state bordering the Red Sea, the Sahel region, and the Horn of Africa. And it's strategically located. Its agricultural wealth is considerable. So there are a lot of power plays around Sudan, right? So, what role do you see for other African countries, but also international powers in this conflict? And potentially also in its resolution?
Yeah. So the current Sudanese conflict or war is very deeply rooted in the Sudanese context. It's important to recognize that there are so many local dimensions to it. It's essentially a power struggle over governing Sudan between these two generals, and there are so many dimensions within that in itself. However, in addition to that, or on top of that, there are a lot of regional and transnational dimensions to what is ongoing on Sudan. There are regional powers, like you mentioned. There is Egypt, there is Ethiopia, and there is, Egypt and Ethiopia primarily, who, have interest in Sudan at the moment. But once you go beyond the region or the neighboring countries, the United Arab Emirates is, hugely invested in the current conflict. Saudi, to, let's say, extent, Israel to a very good extent, and then Russia is also hugely invested in the current conflict. But also the international community has been, they have brokered the agreement that led to Sudan's democratic transition back in 2019, and have been playing huge roles in the country. And in so many ways, the partnership between civilians and the military that started in 2019 and was ended by the coup in 2021, and now even both sides of the military that were working together have fell out of their marriage of convenience, and so on. The international community played a huge role in all of these events. So I think it's important that they continue. If they have contributed to creating the problem that we are currently living, it's important to contribute to the solution, but also to counter all of these regional and transnational interests that are playing out in Sudan. So many people are trying to call the war that is happening currently, a proxy war, that many transnational powers are trying to, play out and using Sudan as a field. That is true to some extent, but like I said earlier, there are a lot of, this is the Sudanese war in the first place. But it's important also to look at these regional dimensions, but mostly not to analyze, what the current conflict is caused by, but to use these regional and transnational linkages and connections as leverage to exert pressure on the fighting generals to end the fight now. We have been seeing how they're not responding to the pleas that the international community have been making and asking them to stop, but but I think they would respond to serious pressures, actions like target sanctions and so on, which could be directed using the leverage of these regional powers and transnational dimensions of the current conflict.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look also at the future, Hamid. The political space in Sudan is clearly highly militarized, right? And you are a policy analyst. You're working on democratic processes and such. What are the prospects in the longer term for democratic transition in Sudan, for peace and stability?
So I think what is happening now is a very strong demonstration for how right and how important were all the demands of the revolution and of young people in Sudan were when they have been chanting for removing the military from the political scene and from the governance structures in Sudan. What is happening now is a clear demonstration for why that was very important. As you rightly mentioned, Sudan's political economy and history and so on is highly militarized. The military has always been part of the picture, but ever since 2019, people have been saying we need to put an end to this. The military needs to go to its barracks, and the paramilitaries needs to be integrated with merge within the military or dissolved or whatever people agree on as part of the security sector reform discussions and so on. And what's happening now shows that that has been very important. So, in my opinion, we should use the current events as, even stronger motivation for why democracy is important in Sudan and for why we should establish or start the democratization journey as soon as possible. However, I really worry that, Western governments who are, worried about the situation in Sudan and worried about the security of the whole of Africa and the whole region and how this would create refugees influx in Europe and broader and so on, would try to dismiss the democracy kind of discourse from discussions and so on, and focus primarily on security and peace building and so on, which in my opinion would be a very big mistake to make once yet again. We should not focus on establishing security and stability in Sudan without taking on board the democracy discourse, because we have seen that everything that you would read in textbooks about the democracy and security nexus and how they are both interlinked and they go hand in hand. Sudan is a very clear demonstration of that. So it's important that for the sustainability of whatever security and peace and sustainability we're trying to have in Sudan, democracy needs to be on top of the agenda as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you there, Hamid. Thanks so much for giving us an update about what's happening in Sudan. Last time we met was in peaceful times in the capital of Uganda, Kampala. And I hope the next time we speak that Sudan will be in a much better place than it is today. So thanks so much again for joining us today. And thanks also to our viewers for watching Governance This Week. Again, next time I will be back in the studio and we'll look at what's boiling in the world of politics and policy. Thanks for watching.